Stand-up comedian Jeremy Seville's directorial debut Loqueesha stars a bartender named Joe who breaks into the world of talk radio by pretending to be a sassy, loud black woman. Now, anyone who's seen the trailers thinks the movie is super racist, but is it possible that it is even more racist than it appears?
You live with Loqueesha. What's your problem?
Hi, Laquisha. It's Bree.
Oh, I ain't talking to you, not the way you sound. Next caller.
Yeah, it's very possible. It is. So, this is a bonus video this week because of the week that I was sick and didn't put a video out. Mostly I watched this movie and I had to talk to someone about it, so why not all of you? Surely by now you've heard of the movie Laquisha. You've seen like the memes or like the trailer at some point. It is a uniquely offensive film. It's one of the weirdest comedies I've seen in a long time for like a number of reasons that we're going to get into. But first and foremost, the big thing about the movie is that it's just a fucking terrible racist idea. It's about a dude who essentially puts on audio blackface to get famous, and that's bad. That's universally bad. I shouldn't have to explain. So, I heard about it on Twitter like a few months ago. I was like, oh, this looks fucking terrible. This shouldn't exist. But even then, there's a part of me that was a little bit fascinated because I was like, it's 2019. Like, how tone deaf do you have to be to make this movie? But then I thought, like, what if it's, like, secretly really, like, smart, right? Like, what if it's, like, a really terrible-looking movie, but, like, under the surface, it's actually, like, you know, tearing apart what you think a movie like this would be like. Maybe it's, like, layers. I'm an optimist sometimes, I guess, and it's a really dumb thing to be if you're a movie critic, but that's how I went into the movie. That's what I thought maybe it might be more than what it is on the surface. It is not that at all. If anything, the thing about Laquisha that is so interesting to me is that I thought it was going to be like one kind of really racist, and it's actually like a completely different kind of racist that is like even more pernicious. So like, Jeremy Seville is a stand-up comedian. I've never heard of him before. He basically looks like someone put Norm Macdonald and Neil Breen into like a teleporter and then like fucked it up, and like this is the guy that came out the other end. I didn't know anything about him, so I just assumed he was one of those like stand-up comedians who like hates like PC culture and complains about colleges and stuff like that, like one of those guys. And he's not exactly. I mean, I didn't take the time to watch his stand-up. I'm not even 100% confident that I've got his name correct, to be entirely honest. But the movie is not exactly like that kind of movie. I thought it would be like really like overtly aiming towards like those people, like Nick DiPaolo fans, I guess. And it's not quite. Like, it's this other weirder brand of idiocy that thinks it's actually really smart and isn't. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not as simple as it just being like a stuck-up white guy who decides that like women and blacks are taking all the opportunities, who's going to pretend to be one to get ahead. Like, it's not like that, which is what I thought. I thought it would just be like a completely pig-headed thing. Instead, there's like this, it's like worse, because the character Joe that Jeremy Seville plays in the movie, like from the minute, so opening scene, right? The minute we meet this guy, he's a bartender at a bar that I guess 4 people go to. It's like a low-budget movie, so there's not like a lot of extras and stuff. And Joe is like giving a guy advice, and the guy's talking about how he hates working 8 hours a day, pretending to be somebody else in order to pay the bills, right? I mean, we all kind of hate that. And Joe is like, you know, gives him some like homespun advice, and then like immediately there's this other guy who always seems to be at the bar, whose entire purpose is to like tell Joe how cool and smart he is. Like, I thought maybe they'd reveal that guy was in his imagination later, but it's not. It's a real person. He just exists to go, yeah, Joe, you got him. He's like one step away from being like, yeah, king of the slams. And immediately thereafter, Joe then meets this like gorgeous black woman who comes in, who looks angry and is complaining about men in like a very like stereotypical way. And then Joe gives her some like tough love advice about her shitty boyfriend she should leave. And she's like, oh wow, you're really smart. Like, every character that meets Joe, he gives them some kind of advice, and then they're like, wow, Joe, you're like the fucking smartest person I've ever met. You're so wise. How did you get to be so wise? Barely paying his rent, white man who works as a bartender in his mid-40s. And he's just like, I've just lived a lot of life. And it's not like a joke. It's not like a parody of the people that are like that. Like, it's like this guy is like that. He just sort of thinks like, I know that I like, you know, probably don't read a lot of books. And, you know, I'm a bartender and I'm in my mid-40s and I've accomplished nothing and I can barely provide for my son. But I'm really fucking smart. I'm smarter than almost everybody else who actually does things with their lives. and like if someone just gave me the opportunity, I could prove it to everybody. It's like he's like that kind of guy. But even worse because he's really like falsely modest, where he thinks like, nah, this is it for me. I'm just a bartender. I like it. This is what I need to be doing. He's like convinced himself that's normal. It's weird. But right away, you know that this is like wish fulfillment, right? Like he's a bartender instead of a stand-up comedian, but clearly this is like something Jeremy Seville thinks about himself. You can tell from the way the story moves forward. It's not quite Neil Breen territory where like he's like a weirdly like mythical hero necessarily, but it's getting there. It's close. It's definitely like beyond Woody Allen territory in terms of like solipsistic writer stand-in characters. So the thing is, that beautiful woman decides for whatever reason that she thinks is really cool, and she finds him at this radio opportunity where someone needs like they need radio hosts for whatever reason, and she helps him put together like a demo and stuff, but they don't pick him. And he decides, like, oh, well, it says that women and minorities are encouraged to apply. Like, that's what they really want. They don't want some stuffy old white guy telling them and giving them advice. They want... He's watching, like, what looks like a parody of, like, Jerry Springer. Like, modern daytime talk shows are trashy, but, like, they don't even look like this anymore, so I thought that was kind of weird. And he's like, yeah, that's what they want. They want Laquisha. And then from there on out throughout the movie, he creates this character, Laquisha, who is basically, like, the worst white guy impression of Tiffany Haddish. Like, it's infuriating how bad this impression is. And he makes a demo as Laquisha on his iPhone. He ends up getting the job, and he has to, like, to host his radio show. You meet the people that run this local radio station, and it's like a father and son, and the son kind of reminds you of the Stop Telling Adults They Could Be Stars guy, and I Think You Should Leave with Tim Robinson. Like, they talk like that. Like, they talk real loud. The business is changing. We got to do stuff about it. And it's super weird. Again, if it was on purpose, it'd be hilarious, but I think it's just bad acting and bad writing. But he gets this job. He becomes Laquisha. He has to get, like, the only black guy he knows to help him, like, do the audio engineering and stuff, because in order to keep this masquerade going, he puts it in his contract that, like, no one can be in the studio except him and his personal producer and stuff. They go pretty far into, like, explaining the logistics of how he can keep this a secret. So I was somewhat impressed with that. They at least, like, took the time to think about that stuff. But he starts doing the radio show. It becomes, like, hugely popular overnight because, of course, all that was missing from Joe's, like, homespun wisdom was like digital blackface. Basically, is what he thinks. He thinks that people just want, like, a sassy black woman because she's entertaining and like a cartoon, but with, like, his honest, real, truthful advice. And unfortunately, in the case of this film, that it seems to be what his made-up audiences really want, because the thing blows up, it becomes huge. The main reason he even does this, the whole thing is, like, the conflict of the movie is that Joe considers himself to be, like, this really honest, truthful guy who doesn't lie for any reason. He doesn't deceive people. He's, like, super on the level. And he does seem to be, like, that kind of person. The only person he seems to lie to is, like, himself about him not being racist. So the idea of doing this contrivance only happens because his, like, bitch fucking ex-wife wants to put their son through, like, a school he can't afford. A lot of movies have, like, bitch ex-wives who are, like, written terribly, and, like, no one is like this. But, like, his is, like, particularly one of, like, you put in the Hall of Fame for, like, terrible cardboard cutout ex-wife characters. So she, like, bullies him into getting more money. He does this thing, yada yada. He's put his kid through school. Everything's going great. Then, like, it becomes, things get too big, obviously. Like, they need to do personal appearances and things like that. So there's a whole uncomfortable scene where he auditions women to be Laquisha in person for him. And they get this woman, Renee, who's, like, a big Laquisha fan. And she's, like, even more of a caricature of black women than, like, he is as Laquisha, which is crazy. And she takes the job, and, you know, so now she's in on it. So the only three people that know that he's Laquisha are him, his black, like, producer guy, played by pretty funny stand-up comedian Dwayne Perkins, and then the woman that plays Renee. Like, they're, like, this little triumvirate. And, like, she's super into it because she gets to go to all the mall openings and talk shows and stuff like that. Even though, like, they don't sound alike, people don't question it, whatever, it's a movie. But, like, it's very clear that she only has sort of the loud part of being Laquisha, right? She's not, like, she's not the nurturing, caring, like, advice person. She just wants to be loud and famous. Which, again, like, it's like a double sort of, like, you don't think this is racist, but these are the only ways you picture black women as being, like, whatever. We'll get more into that. And from there on, the story has all these, like, different, you know, obstacles, but they're not the obstacles You think a movie like this would just be like, I'm Laquisha, oh no, I'm gonna get caught, they catch me, and then I apologize. Like, it's just, the middle part should really just be like, oh no, how is he gonna not get caught being Laquisha? If Dan Harmon did it with like his bubbles and stuff, that's where it would go. It's not like that though, because the actual undercurrent isn't about whether or not he's gonna get caught being Laquisha. The real story is about Joe's internal conflict between like being a person who gives honest advice, and that honesty and credibility is everything, but at the center of it, he's a liar. He's a fucking fraud. So it's really about reconciling those two things. So this is where the movie gets actually pretty ridiculous, and why I think even if you hate the concept of this, you should at least watch it, because it's like, it's weird. The thing is, there's all these strange, like, galaxy brain fucking moments in the movie where you think, okay, this guy has to know how bad the idea of this movie is. The general concept is fucking offensive, and this isn't a movie where he plays like a dumb guy who doesn't think about that stuff because he's just blatantly racist. He's a guy who thinks he is smart enough that he can, like, poke at the concept. There's a couple of key scenes where this happens. One scene is this, like, rude white dude, like this, who looks like a fucking white supremacist, calls the radio show and calls Laquisha a racist bitch because she doesn't understand what a white man goes through and yada, yada, yada. And this scene is, like I'm pretty sure this guy's gonna be up for a Razzie next year. I hope this is the scene that they show as the clip for his Razzie, and I hope he gets it. He just tears into this white dude, and it's literally like the Tropic Thunder. I'm a dude disguised as a dude playing another dude. That bit, but like with a white guy pretending to be a sassy black woman on the radio, like eviscerating an equally middle-aged white guy who's a piece of shit about why he's afraid of black women and why he's afraid of, like, modernity and society leaving him behind. And I remember thinking at the time, like, yo, maybe this movie's, like, good because, like, maybe Joe is going to understand that he's just like that guy. And the same reason that guy hates and fears Laquisha is the same reason Joe fucking made her up in the first place. They're flip sides of the same coin, you know? Like, because this other guy is sort of like that typical what we picture racism to be, right? Like, Klan hoodie, Charlottesville racism. But Joe is, like, centrist, like, weird Joe Biden racism. You know what I mean? Like, you should know better, and you act like you know better, but you, like, totally fucking don't. But I thought at the time, maybe the movie was gonna, like, follow this thread, because the scene's, like, a showstopper. I mean, like, it sucks, but it's, like, I was like, oh, I didn't expect a scene like this. You know, where the white guy is telling him, like, you don't know what it's like to walk in a white man's shoes, and it cuts back to white Joe, and, like, obviously he does. And there's a couple of really great cutaway shots of his producer in the booth watching this, like, in awe. And at the time, it looked like the movie commenting on Joe, right? It looked like his producer guy is like, oh my god, you don't know how fucking hypocritical you sound. But then in reality, he's actually, like, impressed. Because, like, every time, that's actually the thing with the movie. Every time there's a moment where it seems like the story is going to interrogate Joe as a person and force him to come to grips with a bunch of weird, deep-seated shit that he is clearly pretending doesn't exist, in that moment, the character who was most poised to do it then doesn't, and in fact, like, ends up, like, filleting him, you know what I mean, and telling him he's amazing. Like, his producer is, like, the perfect person to be like, brother, you have no idea how hypocritical you sound, this is crazy, I can't believe we're doing this. And instead he's like, man, you're really good at this, you know? Much later in the film, after he's eventually, like, outed, you know, the love interest, the gorgeous black woman from the earlier movie, she sort of, like, takes him to task in one of the final scenes, and I'm like, okay, finally, someone's gonna fucking tell this dude how racist and horrible this is. And, like, she basically tells him, and then he's like, this wasn't about race, it was just about blah, 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 blah. And then she's like, yeah, you're right, I still love you, and they make out. So it's just like, it's such a fantasy that this white dude has, where he can do something horribly racist on a grand scale, and then not even really be punished for it. Because usually movies like this where a character lies the whole time and does something really bad, when it comes to light, he has to pay for what he did before he can, like, learn from it and then have a happy ending. Like, there has to be attrition. That's why these stories tend to work, you know? But there's no attrition for Joe. What really gets me is, like, beyond the terrible thing with him and the white guy, right? And then beyond an even crazier scene where he starts to have, like, split personality disorder, where, like, Laquisha starts coming out in his, like, daily routine. So he does an entire episode of his radio show where he gives himself therapy, like, as Laquisha. Like, this is a scene that really happens. Like, he's fucked up. He can't stop Laquisha from coming out and essentially, like, taking over his body, which is weird. A bunch of dumb transphobic jokes come in, obviously. And he goes to his mother, and his mother's like, there's someone you should talk to who I think could really help you. It's this radio show host, Laquisha. It's literally the fucking But I Am Pagliacci scene, but about Laquisha, and I wanted to die. But he actually does this whole scene where, as Laquisha on the radio, he's talking to himself about his own problems and about his problems with Laquisha. And it's also a really bad scene. This would also be good for, like, the Razzie pre-roll thing, but, like, it's kind of impressive. Like, the way it's cut, at times it uses, like, fake split screen, so you can see his own reactions to himself while he's talking to Laquisha, and then cuts back and forth, and, like, goes from different angles of his face. For, like, a shoddily directed and written cheap movie, it's a pretty good sequence. Like, objectively speaking, I was like, oh, this is, like, better than you would think you'd see in a movie this bad. Like, it's not good, but it's, like, it's interesting, you know? And I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe from here we can move into a direction where he actually challenges himself. Because, like, really, you know, the story clearly is less about, like, this racial stuff, and it's more about a guy who's good at giving advice and wants to profit off of it, but to profit off of it requires him to compromise the honesty that makes that advice so good. Like, that's sort of the story. But it doesn't really, like, stick to that, because then it transforms into this whole weird thing where the fake Laquisha, Renee, like, is mad that he turns down an offer from Oprah to do a TV show. Oprah's not in the movie, don't worry. And, you know, his whole thing is, like, it'll get too big, it won't work, and she'll be like, I can just do it. Anyone can do what you do. This is, like, the other big scene where it's someone, you know, calling him out, like, I'm an actual black woman. You don't have a fucking copyright on being a black woman, like, you piece of shit, what's wrong with you? And I thought, wow, finally, he's just gonna get his fucking shit read to him. But instead they make Renee, like, really selfish and callous and weird and evil. Like, the actual villain in the movie is the black woman that, like, he's essentially using to be the stand-in to be Laquisha at places he can't go. And it's because she is blackmailing him, saying she's going to tell everyone that he was Laquisha if he doesn't do the Oprah show and then give her the majority of the profits. Which is crazy, because there'd be a lot of money from it, thing one, and even the minority stake in the profits would be enough to put his kid through school. So if anything, this would be like a win-win, because he can continue doing his dumb radio show that he likes to do, and then provide for his son, and then an actual black woman could fucking profit from his insanity, right? Like, it's like the closest you can come to being, like, you know, a victory for everybody involved. But he doesn't want to do that, obviously. And the reasoning is because Renee is not him. Renee, even though she can look and sound like Laquisha, because apparently, you know, she's also a caricature, she doesn't have, like, the heart and the wisdom to give good advice. And there's this whole sequence of her being, like, an evil version of Laquisha on the radio. Like, he quits the radio show, and she's like, well, I'm taking it over! And just starts doing the radio show part 2, but she obviously sounds different, and she can't give advice, so it's just her being, like, I don't know, what I think white people think of when they see Monique. She's just, like, calling herself, like, God and stuff. It's ridiculous. And she ends up having to kind of come back to him to try to amend things to get him to do the show again, and he doesn't want to. And he ends up outing himself on the radio. And he gives people a choice, like, either we'll do a vote on Facebook or whatever, like, either I'll go away, or I can come back and do my show just as myself, because you guys really were here for the advice, I hope, or I'll come back and do it as Laquisha, if that's what you guys really want. And there's 20% people want him to go away, 40% want him to do the Joe show, and the other 40% want him to be Laquisha, so he does both. The show ends with him getting his own show as himself, and when that show is over, he then does another part of the show as Laquisha, because people want artifice, yada, yada, yada. It's supposed to be some kind of commentary on, like, reality TV show culture or whatever, but, like, it just isn't. It is 100% fucking wish fulfillment. This dude does this horrible thing the whole movie and then doesn't suffer any consequences for it. He gets the girl in the end, a black woman, by the way, who should just be like, yo, no, that's creepy. There's no way I'd date a person who thinks this is okay to do. She goes along with it. His kid loves him. His ex-wife begrudgingly respects him. Laquisha. It's a bad movie, all right? There's even a scene where Laquisha talks someone out of, like, suicide. At that point, it's actually directly, I should have talked about this earlier, it's directly after the bit where he, like, gives himself advice as Laquisha. Immediately after that, his producer's like, I know you just talked yourself off the ledge, but do you think you can do it for someone else? For real? And then there's this... Suicide is not funny, but it immediately undercuts the fake, like, drama in the scene because it cuts to a woman who is clearly in front of a green screen of a bridge, threatening to jump off. And then Laquisha's like, well, girl, if you want to kill yourself, just go ahead and do it. And, like, reverse psychologies her out of killing herself by telling her to go fuck people in France. And it's just so bad. It's so bad. It's awful. But, like, at its core, like I said before, the movie's about this guy and his advice and honesty and all this stuff, and about not selling out, right? It goes back to, like, the first line of the movie when that guy in the bar is like, it's so hard pretending to be someone else for profit. And, like, that's what we have to do, right? In most people's lives, they have to work some kind of job. It's not something they necessarily want to do, and they have to be a fake version of themselves in order to provide for their families and themselves or whoever, you know? And that's rough. That's, like, a really terrible thing about modern life. It's miserable. So if you wanted to tell a story about a person trying to succeed and have the things in life that they want to have while trying not to lose themselves in the process, like, that's a classical tale, right? That's something anyone could relate to. Whether you work at, like, fucking 7-Eleven or you're, like, a sign guy outside of the Sprint store trying to get people to buy Galaxy phones, like, whatever it is you do, you know, that's, you know, you could relate to that. Especially, it's a comedy, especially comedians and stuff, you know, like that kind of, like, underlying thing about, like, I want to be myself, but I want to get famous. This isn't like that, though. It's this whole other thing. Like, a good version, or at least a passable, unoffensive version of Laquisha would be Joe as a bartender. He's an older guy. He doesn't understand smartphones and stuff because it's kind of how they play him. Like, he doesn't like new things. And he tries to get to the radio show and it doesn't work. Because he's, like, an old white guy and he's out of touch and people don't think that's hot anymore. Because it kind of talks about, like, how radio has changed and people don't care about shock jocks and stuff anymore, right? Well, you could make it that instead of choosing to pretend to be a black woman, he just pretends to be a young person. He just pretends to be, like, a cool young, I don't know, like, Logan Paul YouTuber type, you know? He just pretends to be, like, a hip influencer. And then he could not want to be seen because they'll see that he's old, so he has to hire some, like, young dipshit kid from Instagram to pretend to be him for this radio thing. And then that kid, because he's an influencer type person, will figure out how to, like, make it bigger, and he'll be the one that threatens Joe's little empire. And all the same beats can still happen. And then you could just have him become as callous and selfish as he thinks young people are. Like, this version of that. And then throughout the process, he can learn things about himself, and you can do all the same shit. All of it, beat for beat. Only it's not offensive. And it makes more sense. Because, let me tell you something. More radio stations would want, like, young, hip, cool people than they'd want, like, a black woman over, like, a white guy. That's just, like, that's the biggest part. It's like, oh, radio just wants loud black women now, not white men. What fucking radio do you own? You know, so it's not like this couldn't have been decent. It's not like the basic dramatic motivations that he seemed to want to expel in telling the story couldn't still be told without blackface. It'd be even better. But the thing is, at no point does Joe interrogate why that is the specific mask he chooses to use. At no point does he really grapple with himself about the fact that when he thinks that he's not what they want, that he thinks everyone else wants a loud, sassy black woman. Or a cartoon of a loud, sassy black woman. Because, like, it's ridiculous, the character he portrays. And, I don't know. I think it's almost more offensive that a guy who seems to be somewhat smart made this movie than if this had been, like, I don't know, someone else who hangs out with Colin Quinn, like one of those guys. Like, those guys love shit like this. I get it. So the fact that this guy shows genuine bits of heart throughout the movie, and at times, you know, seems like a relatively decent guy, still made this fucking movie that has weird homophobia and weird dumb shit and just doesn't make any sense and is like... In the opening scene, he's doing, like, a terrible, like, Indian guy accent. It's just, like, there's just so many things that are, like, unnecessary. He's not that funny a guy, you know? If anything, the only thing he has going for him is the parts of the movie where he seems like kind of a straightforward, you know, kind of earnest, like, regular Joe. His name's fucking Joe, for God's sakes, you know? So... the fact that this is what he came up with, it's like, bro, you are really dealing with some deep-seated shit. In this country, ever since Barack Obama was elected president, we have tried to pretend like race is no longer as big a deal as it used to be. And the main reason that we do that is because so many of the people who have like the most racist feelings are the ones who think they don't. They think that like this isn't about race or gender. Like I'm just pretending to be a black woman for profit. There's only 2 black women in my movie, and I'm fucking one, and the other one is an evil bitch. Like that, I don't have issues with race or gender. It's sad, you know. I think that we need to stop being so. Well, not me. I'm not like this, but there are people that feel like it's so easy to call out racism when it's like blatant, overt, like clan people. But when it's, you know, these middle-of-the-road white guys who think they're too smart to be racist but are actually like doubly racist, you know, they have no clue. Like this man woke up and made this movie and didn't think it was going to be a bad idea. You know, that's crazy. And enough people helped invest in it that he could do it. This exists. This is a real movie. It's on Amazon Prime right now. So that's my take on Laquisha. Horrible movie. Probably don't watch it, actually. But if you want to, the weird, like, crazy over-the-top scenes are fascinating, at the very least. I have some more thoughts on the general state of modern comedy and things like that that I'm probably going to tap into in this week's main video that comes out on Friday about another movie I watched this week that also really pissed me off. So if you guys are looking forward to that and you're not subscribed, please hit subscribe. Hit the little bell icon so you get notifications for when that video comes out so you don't miss it. And if you guys have seen Laquisha, hit me up in the comments. Tell me what your favorite part is. If you are never going to watch Laquisha ever and you wonder what's wrong with me and why I watched it, and you want to refer me to a useful mental health professional, you can just put those referrals down below as well. Thanks. I'm Dom, and I watch movies like Laquisha, so you don't have to.